In the previous video, we learned a little bit more about programming Lambda function handlers. Now let's explore testing and debugging. In this video, we are going to look at three different testing and debugging approaches. First, using the serverless framework. Second, using Postman for testing our API. And third, using the AWS Management Console. We are back at our handler.js file from the video before. There are a couple of things that I want to change. First of all, let's change the response method back to something that our API can work with. Give it a body property with a stringified JSON content. And in the JSON content, I want to give back the event and the remaining time from the context. Alright. And then instead of returning an error, we'll return the response. Now, first, let's invoke the function locally. And I'm going to use, again, the synthetic event. Okay. We get back our stringified whatever we wrote into this body. And let's add some console log statements to the beginning of our function. So again, as before, I'm logging out the event and the context. Let's invoke it again, locally. Okay. Now you can see if I invoke my function locally, I can see the console output right before I see the response from my callback. Let's deploy our function. And then I want to test it remotely again. Okay, our service has been deployed. And I call the invoke command, but without the local subcommand. So SLS invoke, our function name, and our synthetic event. Alright, as you can see on our console, I get the response back from our callback, but I can't see the console logs. So how do I retrieve the remote logs? If you look into the SLS command, it does have a logs subcommand. Let's try it out. SLS logs, and it needs as a parameter the function name, which is hello. Now we can see the logs that have been retrieved from our AWS account. It uses a service called CloudWatch. And here you can see the console log output. Event is, that's from this line, and context is, that's from this line here. And you can see that Amazon gives us some additional information, like the duration that we have used. So actually we just used 60 milliseconds, but because it's rounded up to the next 100, we are built for 100 milliseconds. We have configured our Lambda function with 1 gig of memory, but we only used 9 megabytes. So this information is also useful for cost optimization purposes. Next, we are going to use Postman to test our API. If you don't have installed Postman yet on your computer, you can get it at getpostman.com and install it on your local operating system. I have opened Postman, but I can't remember what our URL is, what the endpoint is of our service. So let's head back to the terminal and find out. We can get information about our service by typing SLS info. This will give us several infos, including our endpoint. Let's copy the endpoint. And now we can enter the URL. Select the appropriate HTTP method. In our case, it's the GET method. and send our request. Et voila, we get back the response, including our event. And somewhere down here, the remaining time that I retrieved from the context. So we just used approximately 5 milliseconds. The last approach for testing and debugging that I want to show you is via the AWS Management Console. So let's sign in to our Management Console. We are signed in to our Management Console, and let's go to the API Gateway service. Here is our new API that we have created with a serverless framework. Let's click on the hello path and get method and click here on the test icon. We have done this before. Scroll down and click test. And this will give us the same info as from before, as in Postman. Let's go back to our resource path and the get method. And I showed you a shortcut to our Lambda function. It's on the right hand side. So let's go there and check what has been going on. Here's our Lambda function. And we can click on the monitoring tab to view the logs on the AWS Management Console dashboard. So here we see some CloudWatch metrics with the invocations and duration of our invocations. And we can access the logs by clicking here on this link at the right-hand side. So here's a number of logs that occurred over time for the Lambda function. And it takes a little bit of time until these logs materialize. So if you invoke a remote Lambda function and instantly or just a fraction of a second after that, you try to retrieve the logs, you won't be successful. So it takes maybe 5 seconds or so until the logs are available. But now you can see here event is and context is, and that's exactly the information that we retrieved with the first approach using the serverless framework. But using the serverless framework, it's much easier and much more convenient to retrieve these logs than clicking through your AWS Management Console. In this section, we learned how to use the serverless framework to create and test Lambda functions and APIs, and we tried out different approaches for API testing, Lambda testing, and debugging. Now we have all the things to build a real application. So in the next section, that's what we are going to do. Building a serverless application. See you there.